Here's the course content in Blackboard. If we click on the folder Measuring Predicting Part 1, Dr. Bolt, and we see the contents as a set of folders. We've already started to look at the introduction. In the introduction, we have the aim and objectives of M&P Part 1. The aim, you've taken the test, thinking about our learning, and you've looked at the links to the other units, and now we're looking at the objectives, which are also called the intended learning outcomes. And we can go to the course information if you haven't done this already, and you'll find the unit specification, which might help in understanding the terms that we're using. This is the unit specification, the aim, which we've covered already, description of the unit, and then the intended learning outcomes, which are very similar to what we might call objectives. When you're doing your research project, you'll have an aim and you'll develop objectives, and the objectives in teaching are the intended learning outcomes. So it's very useful for you to look at the unit specification if you haven't done already, so you know what we're trying to achieve in the class, and how it's going to be achieved. So this gives you a good idea of how much time you should be spending on each of the things we're trying to do. To the course content. Introduction. The aim that we've put forward for Measuring and Predicting Part 1 is actually quite difficult to teach. Having said that, it doesn't mean we shouldn't try, because examiners for research degrees, and even for PhD examiners for full 3-4 year research degrees, often recognise that it's a failing of instruction. So that's why I think it's very important. It will cover things that you've covered before, but we need to really emphasise that you make use of the knowledge, and that's perhaps what we're trying to do in the course. Having said it's difficult to do, what's the best way of doing it? Should we try and understand the fundamentals of philosophy and epistemology and then move on, or should we just jump in and try to do some research? If we're trying to teach people to do research, is the best thing to do to just get on and do some research? In the end, it's a balance between the two. So we're going to recognise the fundamental philosophy, which you've done some of already in considering what is research, but then we're just going to go on and actually use some research techniques, and these things are turned into the intended learning outcomes for the course. So the first one is to recognise generic processes of research and to categorise research into different types. We aren't going to spend that much time on this. In the end, as an old person, I recognise that it's probably really very important, but young people like to just get on and do things, so we have to have a balance of these things. So we're not going to spend that much time on it. It's really only in the introduction. The rest of it isn't going to be about philosophy and epistemology, so perhaps you don't have to worry about that too much. Then we're going to understand about making measurements and the quality of the measurements, designing sampling strategies, only giving it the most basic consideration. You could have whole courses on any of these things, but these are to reinforce that these are things that you do need to give active consideration to. We'll look at techniques for measurement and analysis, and a large part of the course is going to be developing the idea of what a mathematical model is, from very simple systems to more complicated ones. And overall, through all of these things, you're going to be constantly required to produce logical arguments that connect objectives to aims. Each of these ILOs are weighted to be carried out in particular sections, but they do appear through all of them. So you can see we've got an introduction, M1, M2, there's a project, and there's P1 and P2, which stands for prediction 1 and prediction 2. And if we just go back, you can see those items of the introduction. N1, making measurement meaningful. M2, important themes in environmental measurement. P1, predicting important themes in environmental prediction. P2, predicting case studies and tools. And then the final item is the measuring predicting project. As we said in the aim, it's very important to make links to the other units that you're doing. So again, they're listed. The ILOs that we've listed will be particularly linked to certain other courses. Most of the ILOs in Measuring Predicting 1 will be linked to your second semester unit on pollutant mobility and transformation. And ILO 5, which is developing this concepts of mathematical models, will be developed particularly in Measuring Predicting Part 2 and also in your Pollution Management in Practice ERT 66001. In both of these cases you'll be using much more complex computer models than we're describing in this unit. You won't be writing them, but you will be using them. And then second semester as well, Environmental Monitoring and Modelling is another unit in which you use more complex computer models. The assessment for Measuring Predicting Part 1 will be an hour and a half multiple choice and short answer test, all related to the ILOs. The test will be open book. That means you can bring anything to the test that you like, but the only useful things really to bring are the course materials. Blackboard will be available to you because you'll be doing the test online, but if you complete the course materials, then that's the material that you'll need to use to answer the questions. There's practice questions which are in exactly the same format, and they're very similar questions to the questions that will be on the assessment. So after most sections there are practice questions, and you'll get answers to these, and we'll discuss them during our feedback sessions. None of the practice questions count towards the assessment, so you can take them as many times as you like. The most important thing is that you do the practice questions, because they'll give you a very good idea of how well you're doing and a very good idea of what's in the assessment. The exercises throughout the unit generally involve manipulating some data, which is usually in a spreadsheet, and doing some writing, which you're guided through in both cases by a short video. None of these exercises count directly towards the assessment. After each of them we'll go through and we'll look at model answers for these, so you'll be shown what the correct answers are and how to achieve them, and you can ask questions in class or through the discussion boards that are set up. The discussion board is found as the first item in the list of content folders. If we click on it, end up at the forum, which is titled questions. Currently there are no questions, so we'll start off by creating a thread which starts with a question that then receives answers and comments. So if we have a question to start with which relates to the subject, what is research? And the question I want answer to is, who is better? beetles or the monkeys. You could choose to post anonymously, which you can choose to do if you like. You could attach something if you wanted to. There's nothing to attach in this question. We submit our question. I'll be checking for unanswered questions and I will answer them, and then everyone can see the answers, and we'll also look through the questions as part of our feedback sessions. So this is an opportunity for you to ask and be answered any question, and everybody will be able to see the answers. You can make your questions anonymous. If we click on the thread, got the option of giving an answer. So in answer to the question, the monkeys were a carefully manufactured pop group and therefore better than the Beatles. I could make my answer anonymous, but I'm not going to because I'm quite proud of my answer. The monkeys were able to follow the generic process of becoming a pop group, and therefore they're better than the Beatles. I submit my answer, and then the answer appears in the thread. We can go back to the forum, and it lists that there are now 2 posts. So there's a question which you may be interested in finding the answer to. It may be a question that you would also like to pose, and you can look at the answers, some of which were made by me, or you could start another set of questions, start another question by creating a new thread. We can just return to the course content, and that's where we'll find the link to the forum. It's important that you ask questions, but we'll go through every one of the exercises and develop and show model answers so you can correct your work, and so you can take your work through to the final assessment. But the exercises as you do them don't count towards the assessment. The only thing that counts is the 1.5 hour multiple choice and short answer test at the end. And again, the questions in that test will be very similar to the practice questions which appear throughout the unit. So your job really is to read and listen, and then to carry out the exercises, which mostly involve looking at some data in a spreadsheet and doing some writing, and then asking questions in class or via the discussion board, and taking note of the model answers that we go through in order to correct your work, should it need correcting. There's every chance you have the work right to start with. You can see from the layout of these folders that we're going to make a progression from making measurement meaningful to making environmental measurements, to understanding concepts of prediction and modelling, to actually case studies of modelling and prediction of environmental systems, and finally a project that uses measurement and prediction. The project is an example of research using these techniques, and that'll be the last thing that we do on the course. There are these items that you can check at the end, check that you can do these things by the end of Measuring and Predicting Part 1, which is effectively the intended learning outcomes again.